European Union law, but with a special interest, obviously, in the topic of gender equality in my research. And I see the two co-chairs are Rosemarie Buikema, Professor of Gender Studies, and Belle Derks, Professor of Psychology, part of the Social Sciences faculty. And we have Birte Beuk. She's a postdoc at the law faculty, who is also part of the management team of the hub. Astrid Kergman, who works in the department of Rosemarie, so in gender studies. And Ruud van Velen, I think she's not here today, or perhaps I see her there. She's also, yes, she's here as well. She is part of the psychology department. But obviously people, we have far more people contributing to the hub from different faculties of the university. And it's always nice to see how we have different people also taking part in our brown bag lunches. So it's also a way to get more people involved. And one of the core aims of the hub is not only to have this interdisciplinary approach to equality, gender equality and diversity, but also to be very much engaged with stakeholders, so also to conduct stakeholder-driven research. So in that sense, we are also very happy that Jens van Tricht will be one of our speakers today, who has his own office, also the Emancipator. So that is also the way in which we want to involve stakeholders into our research activities. So perhaps on a last note on the hub, I think what we try to do is not also bring together researchers from these different disciplines, and actually, try to connect people that work on the same topics, but would usually not be collaborating. So to bring these people together is one of the aims, but we also try to develop a kind of interdisciplinary research approach. So to combine institutional and empirical, or let's say experiential level with the symbolic level. So to have these three perspectives from which we look at gender and diversity issues kind of connected in our research activities. And one of the concrete activities we are now developing is the development of an NWA proposal. So Belle is in the lead of this, but we had a stakeholder meeting on this not so long ago, to which Jens also contributed, and which concerned the full-time, part-time gender gap. So with these types of activities, we really want to collaborate and also develop joint research projects. Another very current example of what we do in the hub is contribute to ongoing debates that relate to gender equality and diversity. And one is now, of course, the debate in Parliament of, what we frame as the quota law. I think quite some of you will be familiar with that or have heard about it. This proposal, legislative proposal to have more women on company boards. And we had this kind of soft law approach in the past, and now a more stringent quota law is being discussed in Parliament, and we contribute to this debate with a number of researchers from our university in collaboration with stakeholders such as the Dutch Women's Association. So we also just only yesterday submitted a letter to the Ministry of Education and Culture and Science, as to how we think this law might still be improved. So this is just by way of example, of what we do concretely. I now move quickly to our two speakers for today and introduce them to you. So as I mentioned, today we're going to talk about how gender equality is to the benefit of all of us. And we have two different perspectives taken on this topic. And the first one will be on how improving health for adolescents is benefited by having a more gender equal society. And the other perspective is that of boys and men more generally. So the well-being of a specific group of adolescents, how that reaps fruit from gender equality, but also how the group of boys and men benefit from this. So we have Margreet de Looze as a speaker on the first topic. She is an assistant professor at our Department of Interdisciplinary Social Sciences. She specializes in adolescent health and well-being and has been involved in carrying out several cross-national studies in this regard. She's also involved in the international health behavior in school-aged children and leading its gender working group. And she also contributes to expert meetings of the WHO Regional Office for Europe in Copenhagen, and she has also been an advisor on health and well-being of men and women to this organization. And then for our second presentation, I mentioned already, we have Jens van Tricht. Jens van Tricht studied women's studies at the University of Amsterdam, and he specializes in the changing social roles and perceptions of men and masculinities, and both from a scientific and a social practice perspective, and also at different levels, so local, national, and global, and also on the personal, political, and professional levels. He's a strategic advisor, consultant, and trainer on men and gender justice. He's the founder and director of Emancipator, the Dutch organization for men and gender justice. And he's also a member of the steering committee of the European MenEngange Alliance. And very interestingly, I thought he has also published a book in 2018, Why Feminism is Good for Men, and this is already being translated in German, and also now I saw in English and Egyptian Arabic, and I think that sounds like it's making its way into societies, at least that we perceive to have at least not such a high level of gender as we may have in Europe and North America. So I'm very much looking forward to your presentations. Margreet goes first. I propose that if you have questions for clarification, you can have them, well, perhaps if it's really urgent, I would say you can, of course, intervene during the presentation, but keep them for after the presentation. And we will have the discussion after the two presentations. So the questions that are really more of a reflective or critical nature, I would say serve them until we have had the two presentations. And now, indeed, I see that is what I should share with you. This meeting is being recorded. If anybody objects, I think, to this, to his or her being recorded, then I think perhaps you should put in a comment in the chat and not speak out loud. But without further ado, now I give the floor to Margreet. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Linda. I will start sharing my screen with you now to make sure you can see my presentation. Can you all see it?
Yes, that looks fine.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. So thanks again for the nice introduction, and thank you also for giving me the platform here to talk about my research. And I really look forward to hearing your reactions and discussing the topic as a whole with all of you. I thought maybe I start by telling you how I got into the field of gender equality, because indeed, as you said, my expertise is adolescent health and well-being. My PhD was on adolescent risk behavior, so I looked at smoking, sexual behavior, and one of the things that I was most interested in were these cross-national comparisons, trying to understand why young people in some countries drink more alcohol than in other countries. And after my PhD, I got more interested in well-being. So also, again, international differences in well-being. And one of the things that triggered this, I think, was that the Netherlands typically score very high when it comes to child well-being. I think you're all familiar with this, that every year, every 2 years, it's in the media, it's in the news. There's another study that compared child or adolescent well-being across countries, and the Netherlands typically score very well. They're the number 1, for example. Here, as you can see, this was a study report in 2020. This year in September, this was a study. But also in our own study, the health behavior in school-age children study. This is an international study carried out mainly in Europe and North America. Right now, almost 50 countries are involved. And every 4 years, we collect data in this study. And yeah, every 4 years, when the international report comes out, the Netherlands are somewhere in the top 3, ranking very high on well-being. And that means that every 4 years, we got these questions from journalists asking us, so why are the Netherlands still ranking so high? Why is well-being so high in your country? And well, we had some hypotheses, we had some ideas about this, but we never had really tested them. And if you look into the literature on explaining cross-national differences in, for example, adolescent health, then typically one of the first things you encounter are things related to money. So in wealthier countries, people are generally happier. And that is indeed true if you look at it at a global level. So probably, yeah, people are happier in wealthier countries because some of the basic needs of most people are met. Let's say infrastructure is better, educational system is better, health infrastructure is better. But if you look within only high-income countries, if you look at relatively wealthy countries, then at some point more wealth doesn't mean more health or more happiness. Other things start mattering then. And I think you're all familiar with this pyramid of Maslow about the needs we have as humans. On the bottom, you see the basic needs, so safety needs, physiological needs. And once these are met, so if we live in a context in which our basic needs are met, then other needs start developing, and they also impact our well-being. And I got specifically intrigued by this top of the pyramid, the self-actualization or self-fulfillment needs. Because if you think about achieving your own full potential, yeah, then that made me think immediately about the position of girls and women in society. And I thought, yeah, okay, in some contexts, it's very difficult for girls to achieve their full potential because they are restricted in the choices they can make or in the opportunities they get at an institutional level. And on the other hand, if adolescent girls see many examples in the society where they live of successful women in politics, in business, women having high positions in society, or women having command over resources, this may inspire them and make them also be more positive about their own future. So their future expectations might be more positive, and in the adolescent phase, this is very important. So it might impact their life satisfaction. So that's how I started thinking maybe this gender equality may have an explanatory value in these cross-national differences in young people's well-being. So I came up with this hypothesis that in countries where there's more gender equality, girls' life satisfaction might be higher due to these more possibilities for self-actualization. And then I dived a bit more into the literature. And that actually made me come up with a different hypothesis. Because I came across the work by Wilkinson and Pickett. In 2009, these two researchers, they wrote a book which is called The Spirit Level, Why More Equal Societies Almost Always Do Better. And in their research, they focused on income inequality when it comes to inequality. And what they did was, in a very convincing way, they showed that in countries with more income inequality, so where the gap in income is bigger between different groups of people, in those countries, people did worse on a wide range of health and social problems. And it really ranged from physical health, mental health, drug abuse, education, imprisonment, violence, teen pregnancies, obesity, trust. There was less trust. On all of these outcomes, more unequal rich countries did significantly worse. And one of the explanations for this was that if you live in a more polarized society, there is less trust because groups are more competitive or more like against each other or further away from each other. And this creates feelings of unsafety. There's less social support. There's more social stress. Also, for those at the top. And that I found really interesting because we can all imagine that if you live in a country with large income inequalities, if you're at the bottom, so if you earn very little money, yeah, that's not nice. That could make you very unhappy. But what they say is that also people at the top, so also people making millions of dollars or euros a year, their life satisfaction, their health, their stress levels were also worse as compared to in more equal countries. So there's something in this inequality that's bad for everyone. And that's related probably to these lower levels of trust, unsafety, social stress. And then I thought you could also reason the same way as they did when it comes to income inequality, to gender equality. You could say overall, maybe just more equality is better for everyone, and more gender equality also means less polarization between the two genders. And that would mean that in more gender equal countries, not only girls, but actually also boys, just everyone would be happier. Why? Because everyone benefits, every child, every adolescent benefits from a more supportive social climate and less social stress. So we have these two hypotheses. I started off with the first one, but reading the literature, I more and more started getting convinced by the fact that the second hypothesis might actually have, I thought maybe that's actually how it works. And we tested this hypothesis based on the HBSC study. To tell you a little bit more about this study, the HBSC study is a large international study. Right now, indeed, including about 50 countries. For this study, I used the data from 2010. At that time, 34 countries were included. They were all European and North American countries, so all relatively high income countries. And the way we collected data was by means of surveys that were filled out in the school context. And the protocol was, of course, the same in all of these countries. And we worked with representative samples, so that made it possible to compare the outcomes of the surveys with one another. And the survey is held among 11 to 16-year-olds. So that's the age range in which we did our study. We measured life satisfaction by means of the Cantrell ladder. So that means that we asked adolescents to give their life a grade, ranging from 0, which would mean that I'm having the worst possible life, to 10, meaning I'm having the best possible life. We took, as a measure for gender equality, we combined the HBSC data with data from the UNDP regarding the gender empowerment measure. And this measure measures women's share in political participation, decision-making power, economic participation, and command over resources. And maybe it's good to mention that you're probably familiar with the fact that there are different indicators of gender equality across countries. And on some of these indicators, the Netherlands score really high, and on other indicators, the Netherlands score really low. So this is an indicator measuring, for example, when it comes to economic participation, it's about which percentage of women takes part at the labor market. And in the Netherlands, that's relatively high because many women work. They work part-time, but they work. So in the gender empowerment measure really measures the extent to which women have a share in these facets. So how many female participants we have in the parliament also, for example. We ran multi-level regression models. So with adolescent life satisfaction was the outcome and gender equality was the predictor, national level gender equality. We controlled for adolescent age, gender, FAS, which stands for Family Affluence Scale. That's a socioeconomic status measure for adolescents. And we also controlled for family structure. And at the national level, we controlled for national wealth and income inequality. So we really wanted to know if we take into account this national wealth and income inequality, does gender equality then add something to explaining these cross-national differences in life satisfaction? The results, I made a simplified version of the results. So what you can see here are the results of the multi-level regression analysis. First, the factors we controlled for, gender, age, FAS, and family structure. And then you see the statistics for the gender empowerment measure. We found a significant association between the gender empowerment measure and adolescent life satisfaction. Then in the next step, we added the controls national wealth and income inequality. They were not significantly related to adolescent life satisfaction if gender equality was in the model, and gender equality remained significant. So you could say that considering national wealth and income inequality, or irrespective of differences in national wealth and income inequality, gender equality was related to adolescent life satisfaction. I have to make a note here on the amount of variance explained. Gender equality explained 3% of the total variance in adolescent life satisfaction. Now that may sound like it's not important at all, or it doesn't really contribute. That's not really the case, because in this kind of analysis, we typically find that the share of total variance explained by national factors is very low. And I think that's also understandable if you think of what determines someone's life satisfaction, or what determines the happiness of a child or of an adolescent. Of course, the more individual factors, things that stand closer to you, have a much bigger impact. There are also school factors, there are neighborhood factors. And I think we can all imagine that if you live in a family in a very gender equal country, but the family you live in is malfunctioning, there's abuse happening, for example, in your family, obviously that has a much bigger impact on your happiness than the national level characteristics. So 3% really does mean something. It's not as low as it might seem, or it's not insignificant to say like that. It really means something. We added to these analyses, we added the interaction of gender and gender equality in order to see, do boys and girls benefit to the same extent of gender equality or not? The interaction was not significant, so that means that the relationship between gender equality and life satisfaction was the same for boys and girls, which kind of supports the idea that both boys and girls benefit from gender equality within the country. And we wanted to take it one step further, because thinking of Wilkinson and Pickett and the spirit level, we thought, can we also explain, can we find support for the explanation they gave that that equality is good for everyone, because if in a more equal society there is more social support, there's more trust. We were limited in this sense by the HBSC data, because we couldn't add any variables. That's a whole big process. But there were a few variables in the HBSC dataset related to social support. We have measures of social support adolescents receive in the family, for example, related to the ease with which they communicate with their parents. And we've found evidence in the literature of the fact that if you live in a more gender equal country, the chances that, for example, parents share childcare and household chores more equally are larger. And there are also some indications that if this is the case, that fathers spend more time with their children, their relationships might be better. And also, for example, paternal and maternal well-being can be higher. And also relationship quality between parents can be better. The literature is a bit inconsistent here, but in specific context, you can imagine if fathers and mothers take a more equal role in heterosexual relationships, if they have children, that the children might feel more supported by both parents. We also had measures of social support from peers and social support at school. And we reasoned that in a less polarized society, or in a less competitive society, there would be more social support between peers, for example, less bullying, more classmate support. And what we did was that we added these variables to the regression, and then we tested whether they mediated the association between gender equality and life satisfaction. And we found that they did. So the impact of gender equality on life satisfaction disappeared after adding these variables, and the Sobel test showed that they indeed mediated this association. So that would provide support for the idea that both boys and girls benefit from a more gender equal society through more social supportive relationships in their direct environment. Well, that brings me to the discussion. I think one of the main conclusions of this work is that gender equality is definitely not a girls' or a women's issue. We found that adolescent girls and boys are happier in countries with higher levels of gender equality. Of course, this study has some limitations, and they're mainly caused by the cross-sectional nature of the HBSC data. But to me, yeah, this is really a message that I think that should go beyond the scientific world. The idea that gender equality is not just a girls' issue. Usually we focus on girls and women, and it's really important. But the idea that everyone benefits from a more equal society, I think is really important. And we were not the only ones finding this. There are other researchers who found similar results regarding adult outcomes. We also did some more studies relating gender equality to adolescent health and well-being. For example, in this study, we looked at so-called masculine behaviors. Behaviors that by many people, or according to traditional gender norms, are seen as masculine, so fighting or physical activity. And we saw that in countries with more gender inequality, boys are more likely to engage in physical fighting. And also in those countries, girls would be less likely to engage in healthy behaviors such as physical activity. Probably, yeah, this is related to gender norms in these countries. But so sex differences in these behaviors related positively to societal gender inequality. And taking it one step further, even, I thought this spirit level argument from Wilkinson and Pickett, what they made based on their study on income inequality, which may apply for gender inequality, that it may actually work for many other forms of inequality as well. For example, inequality when it comes to ethnic minorities or people with a minority background. Recently, there's been a lot of attention for the Black Lives Matter movement, for institutional racism. And yeah, I can imagine that also here, the majority of a country, so let's say in the Netherlands, it would be the native white Dutch people without a migration background, that they also benefit from a society which is more equal and in which there is less polarization. And I think it's really worth doing more research on this topic, and also bringing out that message into society, because I think it could really mean a major step forward in our discussion about polarization and equality, which is very active nowadays. I would like to thank, of course, all the adolescents that participated in our study, my co-authors, and you for listening to me here. I'm very happy to hear your feedback and your thoughts. And if you're interested to read more about the study, I put the reference right here in the screen. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much, Margreet. I think for a great presentation and also very thought-provoking. I'm sure there will be questions and comments. But as I said before, I want to limit it now to just questions that regard clarification. And if you have such a question, you can raise your hand, of course, by the raise hands function. Belle?
Yeah, thanks for this excellent presentation. It was very, very interesting to listen to. And this is probably a question that you get a lot, and that will be resolved when I read your article. But you started with the Netherlands being a country with the most happy kids are most happy. But the Netherlands is not the most gender equal country. So in your research and of course, because this is not the whole story, and there are probably other reasons why our kids are very happy. But when you looked at your data, how did the Netherlands come out of this?
Yeah, no, good question. Indeed, that's also why I said, like, we use this specific measure of gender equality, which measures, probably the fact that children in the Netherlands are quite likely to have a mother who works, but also a mother who is home on Wednesday afternoon, for example, because they work part-time. So indeed, the Netherlands are not a country, when you look at gender equality, that's with many women in high positions, not at all. But when it comes to a father's involvement in the family, and I think that for adolescent well-being, I think that made a difference here, and this gender empowerment measure does capture that part of gender inequality. And I think for adolescent well-being, that really makes a big difference. So about the father's involvement in the child rearing, and just the idea that women are actively involved in many aspects of life. But I completely agree with you. And therefore, I said if you would take a different measure of gender inequality, the gender inequality index, or they're more, and they measure it. They look at different things, then the Netherlands would score much lower. But overall, inequalities are relatively low in the Netherlands as compared to other countries. And in that sense, I think the social support argument makes sense. But I am looking into this more indeed, like what exactly is gender equality? that's important to be clear about that. Yeah, I think for this adolescent well-being, I think the father involvement is one of the big things that is captured by the measure we used here, and that translates into higher well-being among adolescents.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I see two other hands raised, Liz and Nina. So I hope these are short questions for clarification, for discussion we do after Jens' presentation.
Okay, well, I'll just pose my question and then you can see whether it is better for later or now. But I was just curious to know, you know, in the definition of gender equality, there is, I mean, it's kind of a contested definition. Also, there's not like a, not everybody agree what gender equality is. And so I'm curious about like how do you went around to what position to take in gender equality, like what definition of gender equality or what the philosophical underpinning did you take for it, you know?
Yeah, well, I think like in future research, what I would like to do now is actually to also measure gender equality at different levels, at the family level, for example. So to see, okay, so what actually happens in these different countries? Is it the case that parents share more? What about, or maybe include different measures of gender equality and like really put them next to each other? I've seen reviews of people doing that already, saying, well, we have these 5 measures, but actually they measure different things to pinpoint exactly which aspects of the gender equality it is that are relevant for adolescents' health and well-being. So I'm still indeed like finding my way in that. And in this case, we worked with the GEM because at that time it was one of the most recent ones we had, and nowadays already I know that there are other indexes that are actually being preferred to use. So yeah, I'm still. It would be nice to kind of redo the study, but then with a whole range of indicators, and not only at the national level, but also at the family level. I think that would be really important to see if my point, or I just told Bella, if that would be confirmed.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much.
And this might also be a question that Jens will be touching upon, perhaps in his presentation, or one that we can discuss further later on. Nina? I see Nina having her hands raised. We cannot hear you. If you're talking, you need to unmute yourself. Okay, I think we just move forward, Jens, with your presentation now. So very much looking forward to what you are going to share with us. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. This is going to be challenging already. I woke up this morning actually a bit nervous that I had to do a presentation for a whole audience of scientists. And well, I hope it's according to your likings. And I'm not going to try to give a scientific talk. I'll try to share with you the way I've been translating and still try to translate my activist and scientific insights into practice, into activism, into idealism. And when we started, we tried to run the video that I had in my presentation, and that didn't work smoothly. So I want to try it another way now. I have it open, and that's the first thing I'm going to try and share. And then if that doesn't work, I have it for you in the chat, but let's try to see it here. Are you seeing now a Vimeo screen?
Yes, we see your screen.
Okay, so I'm going to try and play it here. I hope it works.
Why are you crying? Like, man up.
That's a woman's role. That's not a man's role.
C'est garçon ou rien. All right? N'importe madame, c'est pour tendre qui ça ou même cap dio.
Lavamos, planchamos, cocinamos.
Jens, we can hear it, but not see it.
Ah, so still the problem. Then we're going to leave it. And I will tell you about it. I think we're not even going to watch it now. Huh? Yeah, now you see it, but if I play it, you can't. So
perhaps if you don't make it into full screen, it might work.
Yeah, shall I try? Okay. I'll try again.
Spreading my seed. Being a man's supposed to be. You can't let your woman punk you like that in the streets.
¿Qué tú estás haciendo ahí cambiándole los pampas al muchacho? Está loco el muchacho. Tú eres el hombre de la casa, de la madre que lo hace.
If you don't keep your wife in line, if she doesn't follow what you say, then you're weak.
We all know that's BS.
I think it's crap.
In my opinion, none of us are born with these ideas.
It's old school, man. You know, it's 1920, 1950 shit, yo.
الأمور يجب عليها أن تتغير من أجل أن تتحسن الأوضاع.
It's not just idealism that we're discussing. We're discussing real flesh and blood human beings that are your brothers, your sisters.
Domestic violence has really left a permanent mark on my life.
Men still control society on a certain level. I've seen it with my wife, and I've seen her be judged and not be given opportunities.
As a young child, I was always told that, a girl ought to do this. She ought to live this way.
And I don't want my daughter to feel like that.
We want a world where men and women are treated equally.
And to do that, you need to work with men.
We can't just say that gender equality is something that women should work on.
C'est nous-mêmes ensemble qui besoin changer.
We're working with men to improve the lives of women and girls and families and communities.
To change what they think it is to be a man.
To change gender stereotypes, to break social norms, and to promote gender equality.
I ask myself every day, what can I do to be part of the solution?
My father was never there for me, and I don't want to be like that. I want to be different.
Vamos acá. Yo quiero enseñarle que puedo cambiar el mundo. Y si yo le puedo enseñar eso a él, él lo puede enseñar a su hijo. Y para la generation de él.
Tout bagay yo ap chanje. Pichi. We as men need to step up.
And we need to support that.
So that we can change the world.
Okay, so now I try to get to my slides again. This video is already 7 years old or so. The MenEngange movement has been growing. I think there's more than 1,000 organizations now globally. In Europe, we have, I think, more than 18 members from more than 30 countries. And it's really a global movement that we're growing. And now, I'm sorry, I'm trying to get to share this with you. Do you see this? And now, do you see this in the whole screen? Can someone answer me, please?
No, we cannot see the full screen, but we can see the slides.
Yeah, so again, that issue, like before.
But if you zoom out, it might also work. You have left and top. You have zoom. Now it's a bit too big, a bit smaller. A bit smaller.
Okay, sorry for this. So this is working.
Yeah, this is fine. This is fine. Great.
Okay, let's try like this then. Thank you. And now I need to see how to move on because now it doesn't respond. So now it doesn't respond to my clickings.
Perhaps use your keyboard. Sometimes the arrows work.
Yeah, I was using the arrows.
Oh, okay.
This is an ongoing challenge.
Ik denk dat je de weergave weer aan moet zetten. Dan kan je zelf van slide naar slide klikken. Links boven.
So then I can do it like this. Yeah, okay, probably the best way to do it.
Yeah, this looks fine. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, not as fine as I would have liked it to be, but it's okay. So yeah, I got involved in feminism in the end of the 80s. I call myself a feminist, I think, since 1990. I was a social justice activist, and I found out that feminism is needed dearly for the better world that we were striving for, but also for the better lives that we try to create, especially as men, but also as our communities of idealists. A few years ago, I wrote this book, which is actually a summary of the 30 years I've been involved in these issues. And as was mentioned, it's published in Dutch and in German, and it's being published now in Egypt in Arabic. And I have an English translation, but I don't have a publisher yet, so that's still upcoming. And after the introduction, I felt it's good to share this announcement with you. Unpacking sexual harassment, what can the Netherlands learn from Egypt and Belgium? This is next week, Thursday, organized by ShareNet. I won't be able to be there, but I like the perspective very much. There's a risk that we think of the Netherlands as guiding country for the rest of the world, and that others can learn from us, or that we are so far ahead. I think to keep ourselves sharp, it's always good to look at what can we learn from others. And for this, the MenEngange movement is really inspiring. There has been a global symposium going on online now for a few weeks, and there is really inspiring sessions from all over the world about very relevant topics, and in close collaboration with women's organizations and women's movements around the world. So I recommend definitely to take a look at menengage.org. From the MenEngange inspiration, I felt quite lonely as a man involved in feminism and in gender studies. There were not many men with this same commitment or passion. In Dutch we say you can be a roepende in de woestijn. I understand I can translate like in English like something like I was calling out in the desert, and every now and then I would meet other people wishing for an oasis, and then MenEngange was the oasis. And from MenEngange we started Emancipator to promote the engagement of boys and men in gender justice, and we work on labor and care arrangements, on violence and security issues, on relationships and sexuality, and on gender and diversity issues. Violence prevention and promotion of caring masculinities are two of our core topics. And now it's a pity that I can't do the presentation because the next slides are actually animated and you're going to miss the animations. But I'm going to take you through it anyway. It is the summary of the book again, which was a summary of 30 years of engagement. And it is actually a visualization of outcomes of an interactive workshop that developed over the years. And that is kind of the core of our activities to engage boys and men and to work with professionals and activists. So in this picture, well, I'll try to talk you through the story. So in essence, in origin, we are full of human potential, which is symbolized here by the purple dots. But then even before we are born, it appears that we are not being born as humans, but we are born in a pink versus blue framework, in a gender matrix. We are born as either a boy or a girl. And when you're born as a boy, you learn to ignore and neglect and suppress your so-called feminine qualities. And you have to exaggerate your so-called masculine qualities and talents. So we get out of balance, and something similar happens for girls. We teach girls that they need to be really feminine and that masculine qualities should be ignored, neglected, or suppressed. And so we get this situation which is quite out of balance. Actually, we're standing on one leg and we're tipping over the balance point because we exaggerate those qualities that are allowed to be there. And that causes a lot of problems like violence and gender pay gaps and other gender inequality issues, but also personal issues like depression or sexualization issues, or what we call them, beauty images, etc. So at this point, this picture for me really symbolizes the different levels of things that go wrong, because first we lose half of our humanity, actually, of our human potential. And then we put a lot of energy in suppressing that half. So we lose a lot of energy. And then we exaggerate and actually transform the qualities that we are allowed to have into exaggerations that cause problems. So we get the pitfalls of the gender system very clear here. And of course, this doesn't happen in an equal society where men and women and masculinity and femininity are treated equally and valued equally. It happens in a patriarchal system where men and masculinity and things that are associated with them are valued higher than women and femininity. And women, of course, took on the challenge to claim gender equality, to get access to political decision making, to higher education, to the labor market, etc. And women moved towards men and masculinity in order to claim this equality, but men still remained kind of passive in this. Some men embraced the women's struggle, but there's been very few men or people in society saying men should also change. And when we look here again, we see what happened. For example, when women enter the labor market, we see that one of the blue dots at the left becomes purple again. And then one of the blue dots for the men becomes purple as well. So something that was exclusively seen as masculine has now become human again. And this is where the animation would come in, because now the big blue dots would shiver a bit, because we see some men getting nervous and sometimes even new problems arising from men resisting gender equality. And in the past years, we've seen this ever more. We see that politicians around the world need to be strong men again, and that the pressure for traditional gender roles is growing, and that even on the Commission on the Status of Women at the UN every year, it's more difficult to get to progressive gender equality policies. So we see that more problems arise from resistance to gender equality. And of course, this is not helping to solve any problems. And this is also not helping men really, because the past isn't a solution for the future, but also the past wasn't the ideal situation, even though, of course, men had privileged and powerful and entitled positions, in generally speaking, at least. So what we, as Emancipator, what within MenEngange and what in the global movement for gender justice is at stake is for men to embrace the development of gender equality and to see, for example, that when women enter the labor market, the paid labor market, there is space for men to enter the care labor market, to spend more time with their children, to have more equal relations, to take care of the elderly, etc. So for men, there is a world to win when they dare to and are allowed to explore their so-called feminine qualities, and when they are allowed to put them to use. And then we would see that men also move in the direction of women and of femininity. I hope this is not necessary here with all you scientists, but I need to do this in many presentations. Perhaps it's good to share here as well. These bell curves present what is regularly, weekly, daily being published about differences between men and women. We learn that men are better in car parking or in spatial maths, and women are better in language and in caregiving and in empathy. And all this has consequences also in school careers and treatment of boys and girls. But all these research reports actually say we're talking about the difference between men and women, but actually the overlap between the two is bigger than the difference between the two, and the differences within each group are bigger than the differences between the groups. So instead of saying, well, there is an average difference between men and women, so let's treat boys and girls completely different, there is actually the overlap that is much bigger than the difference on the sides. very important conclusion here in our workshops and in our sessions with, well, whatever people I can say by now, is that we shouldn't see gender as a binary, but it's more a continuum. And it's not even a continuum that is static. It's not like, oh, but I'm a masculine kind of man or a more feminine man. It depends on the day. It depends on my life phase. It depends on the moment of the day. It depends on my role. Even now, am I presenting or am I participating? Am I with my children or am I at work? Am I doing my administration or doing the dishes? There could be a fluctuation of my so-called masculine and feminine traits and behaviors. Then these, we started MenEngange or Emancipator from the insight that actually a lot of initiatives are going on in society and in the world, trying to engage boys and men, asking questions about masculinity, and it can be about education issues or parental issues or violence issues, and violence issues come in many kinds, and actually all these others as well. And we see that there is a lot of societal and personal issues that have to do with gender, and the women's movement and women's studies have clearly pointed out that actually everything, that was what I liked about women's studies, you could do women's studies everywhere, every department, there was women's studies everywhere, because gender is everywhere. And the women's movement pointed this out, and the women's movement developed interventions and activism to change that and to solve these problems by emancipating women, empowering women, entering male domains and putting so-called masculine traits to use. And we saw that men partly resist to this, and that sometimes this leads to bigger problems. And then I point out that once men start to embrace these developments, we can start working on diminishing these problems and making them smaller or making them disappear. And then these two will get even more closely together. And quoting the Nestor of the critical studies of men and masculinities in Europe, at least, Jeff Hearn, we need to do two things at the same time. We need to acknowledge and allow that men and women, and well, all humans, because we shouldn't think only in the binary, that we all have access to all human potential, that we have these human qualities and that they can be equally accessed by men and women. And we need to value them equally, because if we don't do that, we might easily get to the idea of, oh yeah, but we're equal but different, so women belong in the kitchen and maybe we need even to pay them for that, which sometimes seems very old-fashioned but is still a reality in many minds in this world. So we need to get back here, that we are allowed and able to develop and explore our whole human potential and put it to use for the complexities of this world. I had some other videos that I would like to share with you. I'm going to send you the links because it is interesting that all these issues around masculinity in the past years have also been picked up by big companies like, for example, Gillette and Axe, who are real masculine brands and used to have more sexist commercials, and now in the past years really made huge turns. I'm not going to do that now. I'd like to have time for a conversation with you. I do want to share these though. From MenEngange, there have been the International Men and Gender Equality Survey. Images has been implemented in, I think, a few dozen of countries now. It gives very interesting information about the relation between men and gender equality topics in the broad sense. And also, again, because Egypt is in my mind now with my book, and I was there to give a training of trainers some years ago. It's interesting to see that also the images survey has been done in Egypt, Lebanon, Morocco, and Palestine. So it's interesting resources. I will share the link to the page with all resources with you. Thank you for now. Thank you for having me. I hope this was kind of inspiring, and I would be most happy to do a more extended version of our workshop when invited. Thank you very much. Now let's see, how can I close this again? Now get here and I close it like this. So thank you very much.
Jens, thank you very much for indeed a very inspiring presentation. And I think it's especially great how you managed how you visualize ongoing kind of processes, I think, and also responses, I think, that we know also, of course, from our own research, that the resistance that may occur in particular situations where women are actually gaining in power, and what may happen. So I think it was a great way to visualize things, and I'm sure there will be plenty of comments and questions. So I open the floor for discussion now. Who wants to go first? I will have some questions of myself, but I would rather give the people in our online room the floor. Just raise your hand if you have a comment or a question. I think, yes, I see Ruth. Ruth, go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Jens, for this very inspiring presentation. I'm still gathering my thoughts as I'm trying to formulate this question, but I was really triggered by what you said during the end of the presentation. Men and women are equal, and then the expression that therefore we should try to express the tasks that women are doing, doing the dishes and the household, and we should try to put a number on it to make clear. So try to express unpaid labor in payable in economic terms, so that we can understand the value of what it actually is that women are contributing to this society. This kind of rhetoric is something that does slip my mind also as a researcher sometimes. Like, let's express what women are contributing of unpaid labor, because then we can make clear solution to society as we express them in masculine terms. But now, because of your presentation, I'm realizing that I'm actually trying to move this feminine side into a masculine domain in order to make it understandable for the current people in power, so to say. So how then should we handle this problem? Because I think it is something that we are, for example, dealing with in the full-time, part-time discussion.
Yeah. Well, yeah. The question, and I think the best answer is yes, this is as complicated as it is. And I do think it's very good to see and acknowledge that when we generalize about men and women and the roles that have been assigned to us, to them, to men and women, that the direction of gender equality is different and sometimes even opposite. So we need to get men into care and into unpaid labor and into the private sphere. And at the same time, we should beware that they don't take in patriarchal practices, because then they will take over. So we need to make change on many different levels at the same time. And I'm very aware that's also why I like the connection between our very practical and activist work with people in very concrete situations, with boys or fathers or in the neighborhood or whatever, and with philosophical and political questions that arise in science, because we need to have the big perspective and we have to have the small actions. And the most quoted thing from the MenEngange video that I showed is the peachy, peachy, peachy. It goes very slow. I mean, what the women's movement has achieved in more than 100 years in the Netherlands or in the West or in the North or in white countries or whatever, it is huge, and it's still not finished. And I'm not even sure that we're halfway.
No.
So yeah, it is challenging. But I liked the framework from Jeff Hearn. He's very interesting to look into when studying masculinities. But so actually, my summary came from 4 scenarios that he presented at one of the first meetings about masculinity at the European Institute for Gender Equality years ago, where he said there is 4 scenarios, because if you have the 2 dimensions, accepting that men and women are equal or different, and valuing them equal or different, you get 4 scenarios. And there is actually one that I would prefer and that I think is preferable in general. And the others would be, for example, the more Christian or traditional way of looking at it. Yes, we're equal but different. But it's similar arguments that you sometimes hear in the discussion about boys in education, where we agree that girls can do everything that boys do, but boys are still different. So girls can go into STEM, etc. But getting boys into care, we shouldn't treat boys like they were girls.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a problem, because then we still, another quote that I like to do, the Tijdschrift voor Vrouwenstudies, so how would you translate that? The
Journal for Women's Studies.
Journal for Gender Studies.
Women's Studies, I think, yeah. You said gender studies.
Yeah, now it's gender studies, but in 1995 it was still women's studies.
Yeah.
And then they had a theme edition about masculinity. It's very interesting. It's still, you can find it online. And in the editorial, they wrote about masculinity as the sun that blinds everything, that shines its light on everything, but that can't be seen itself because it is so strong in its light. And that's what's happening. So we need to make circumventing movements to explore what masculinity actually is. And of course, by now it's more clear than ever that masculinity is not one thing. That's why we talk about masculinities, because once we apply intersectional lens to gender, it becomes clear that really the position of, Moroccan boys with Moroccan background in neighborhoods in Amsterdam is really different from the background of white middle-class men like me growing up somewhere in a small village in the Netherlands, and so on. So we can explore masculinity by exploring masculinities, I think. Sorry, it's a long answer to...
But thank you. Yeah. Thanks.
I see another question by Carl Lewis, I think. Yes, go ahead.
Yes. Hello, is my microphone working?
Yes, it's working fine.
Hi. So yeah, first of all, thank you for the presentation. I had a question on your example of, for example, change in advertisement, right? So you did mention, for example, hey, we're seeing great changes happening, for example, in the popular culture. And then the immediate thing that came to my mind was the other comment you raised about, hey, however, those who are scared of, let's say, this human approach to life are going to start shivering, right, in your example, and have a reaction to that. So I thought of, for instance, leaders like Trump, right? Yeah. And I recall that Trump nevertheless had, I mean, this Trump is just an example, but the vote percentage they received wasn't, it was still quite considerable. So how do you see us being able to approach the challenge of the shivering male, let's say, right? Especially if the argument is, for example, from the cynic that, okay, Gillette may reply with, let's say, a move from less masculine stereotypes as a response to the market, right? And as a capitalist approach to, well, let's have a profit that can be gained now. So how do we go into this long-term change and the response to such challenges?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. And I'm not really optimistic, actually. Last year we had a European study visit in Stockholm with our Swedish partner. They are the biggest organization working on these topics in Europe, at least. And we had a session in which the question was, how are we going to prevent the backlash? And actually, I felt from deep inside, we're not. We're in the midst of it already. What we can do is prepare ourselves for what may be coming after. We're working on a long-term future. And I see, I mean, I need to cherish the positive developments that I see, and I see grassroots movements working on these issues, and I see boys and men speaking out about their vulnerabilities and needs, and I think that's very important. And I see the resistance and the backlash, and in some way I also think that is well, it was said years ago already, I think by Raymond Connell, one of my main heroine, I should say. In my book, I said it's the Bible on masculinities, what she wrote. And she said the crisis of masculinity is actually not a crisis of masculinity, but of the legitimacy of masculinity. And I think this is what we see. So even your very justified criticism of capitalism, I agree on that. But apparently they see tendencies in their audience that they express. So I'm hopeful to see that apparently boys and men need to ask questions now about masculinity instead of reaffirming it in really very traditional and sexist ways. And I do think that, I hope that the resistance of, one, I would like to mention our own politicians as well, who teach boys that no doesn't mean no, but actually is a yes, and that women want to be taken, but I don't like to mention their names. They are expressions of crisis, of legitimacy, but also of, I think, very important questions of meaning. Sunny Bergman made a few years ago the documentary Men Made. I don't think it is translated or subtitled in English, but she recorded and she interviewed young men visiting Jordan Peterson when he came to the University of Amsterdam. And it was interesting because, I'm sorry, my phone is, Siri is mixing up with this meeting and it shouldn't. I hate Siri. But it was interesting, the boys standing there, the young men, they actually said, we are having a difficult life, we are having problems, and at least he is hearing us. And I don't agree with his answers, and I think it was a challenge for everyone working for gender equality and gender justice to find the good answers for boys and young men for their challenges and really meaningful life questions. And there we come to the problem that still it is very dangerous for men to be unmasculine. Lesson number one for men in this world is you should not be feminine, you should not be gay, not a sissy. And so all these boys with their questions and their problems and their vulnerabilities, where can they go if we don't allow them to be vulnerable? Yeah, so I don't know. So I said already I could go on, and that's what I'm doing now. Thank you for the question. And I'd love to have another talk at another moment if you like.
We can see how much there is to this topic. And perhaps, Margreet, you want to add something to this discussion?
Yeah, I first want to say I think it was really a great presentation, and indeed there's all the work you're doing. It's really fantastic, but still a lot still needs to be done. And I think it's nice that in my presentation it started off indeed quite positively, but you're really indeed showing all the gaps that are still there. And yeah, I just want to say it's really great to hear about it, and to I would love to follow the rest of your work, what's still coming.
Thank you.
Okay. Do we have another question? I would like. I would otherwise like to raise one myself, but I see Bella has a question as well, or a comment.
No, go ahead, Linda.
Now, the thing that I was thinking about, and you mentioned, or it's perhaps an extension of the previous question, so that we are in a situation, I think, where inequalities are growing rather than decreasing, and the COVID crisis adding to this in many different respects. So besides, let's say, the Trump type of governments that we see, I mean, there are, of course, other examples to be found in the world. We also have the COVID crisis providing for at least creating more inequalities, and governments like Hungary, for instance, using this really as a pretext also to introduce laws that make us go backwards rather than progressing. So I was wondering to what extent, well, your research, Margreet, but also, let's say, the 600 organizations that are represented in this alliance, I mean, how can you use this as a force to bring about change? How could you feed into somehow public policies, raise awareness, and, indeed even enhance the level of activism in a way to really create impact also on public regulators and policymakers? What could we do, perhaps within the framework of the hub, also to take up on this?
Well, I think indeed, as you say, with the COVID crisis, and a colleague of you know her, Mara here, because she's doing research also, like following couples in this COVID situation and looking at how COVID has impacted the balance within relationships. With respect to policies, I think it's not related to COVID, but I think it's just another example showing that we're really not there yet, but that we can have an impact. Is the new law on paternity leave, that fathers nowadays get 6 weeks leave, which is a fantastic thing. But then the downside is that they get only paid for 70%, and the expectation is that the richer fathers will take their leave and the poorer fathers will not. And that will only increase the inequalities. So overall, on average, maybe the time that fathers are home becomes better. But I think it really shows the inequalities are just so important to look at, because if we have large inequalities, it's really not a good thing. And right now, this new policy is exactly doing that, is actually increasing the inequalities even more. And recently, I was at the Pakhuis de Zwijger in Amsterdam. They're having some debate nights also organized by Women Inc. And they have this whole campaign right now on, for example, they have these quotes like "het werkt niet," or really stressing the fact that things really have to change, that it all sounds pretty fantastic. Like it sounds fantastic that there is this longer paternity leave, but in reality, there are really some big issues, or we're even creating some issues. And I don't know if you're familiar with this campaign, but I kind of see it everywhere. Maybe it's because my eyes are on it, and I'm about to go with pregnancy leave. So this specific policy, I'm really I feel a link to. But I think indeed, as the hub, I mean, it's really a group of fantastic experts from many different perspectives, like really interdisciplinary, all somehow linked to gender equality. I can think about it, but what you said, like writing letters to, or I have all kinds of research proposals in my mind, but just I think just sending out a message, maybe also can be a letter to ministries, but can also be a letter to the media, or to raise a specific point. I think is necessary. Oh, you're still unmuted, Linda.
Sorry. Thank you, Margreet. So Jens, we have only a couple of minutes left. So for a short reaction also.
I think, well, what COVID made very clear was that men don't feel. No, well, what should I say? I'm going to say it differently. In the first weeks of COVID in Europe, we got more and more messages about tensions in the home and violence raising, etc. And then one of our partners from Switzerland, they published a 3-pager survival kit for men under stress, or men under pressure. And that was translated in, I think, more than 20 languages, and it was spread through our networks, because it was clear that men suddenly being stuck in the home, which is not their traditional domain, they couldn't have their coping mechanisms as normally, going out on sports or drinking or to sex workers or watching porn or gaming or doing drugs or whatever. And we started a new project called Mannenberaad in Dutch, kind of men's counseling, a website, and we started organizing some meetings, because for us this was an entry point to start looking at the problems that men have and how it would be possible to reach out to men before things escalate, because men tend to evade care systems and asking for help until things have gone too far. So this is a new project that we started, and it's only small yet, but I think it's an important part of all this. And what I would really like to share here, I've been happy with my collaborations with the Gender and Diversity Hub in the recent period, and I think it's so interesting. Like the stars that I put around on topics, it's also in science. I know of many people who have done research also about boys and men and masculinity, but maybe part of bigger other topics. And it would be so interesting to have a conference or a meeting or an expert meeting, or even building a network in the Netherlands and in Europe, but let's start maybe even in Utrecht, around the issues of transforming masculinities, because there is so many people doing things around it. And actually, I do know there is a lot of expertise, but often the expertise is seen as part of something else. But in itself, it is a very important topic to look at, because very often now we are still trying to change women in a society that actually needs a system change. And for that, it needs also change of men and masculinity. Yeah. So that would be my wish here.
That's a great, I would say, observation for closing this session. I now see it's still a hand raised, but I'm afraid our time is really up now. We cannot expect people to stay longer than 1.5 hours, I think, in a meeting. But in a way, I think it was also a response to Ruth's observation. We also need to transform, indeed, our perception of masculinity, of the male norm, standard, etc. So I think it's a great idea, I think, that we might pick up on in the future within the hub. I think it was a great opportunity to connect, again, several people, several perspectives. So we also hope, of course, that you will be able to find one another on the shared interests that you have. I've seen some people indeed already exchanging email addresses. Thank you so much, Margreet and Jens, I think, for great presentations. I found it really inspiring, and I think the people in the audience will share that with me. I think this is one of the great, let's say, or the treasures we have these days. I think these inspiring online meetings, and let's say it made my day. So thank you very much. I hope to be able to continue our conversations in real life in 2021. And yeah, see you then, I would say. Thank you all, and also for contributing to the debate.
Tot ziens allemaal.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Ik snap helemaal niet waarom hij doet het niet.